The Society of Jesus was universally suppressed by Pope Clement XIV in 1773. So it's an odd fact that the first Jesuit college founded in the United States was founded in 1789. It's an odd fact because the Society of Jesus had not yet been restored when the first Jesuit college was founded in 1789. When Georgetown University was founded by John Carroll. Now, who was John Carroll? John Carroll was the Bishop of Baltimore. He was a brother of one of the people involved with the Revolutionary Movement. So he was known to the founding fathers of the United States. And he had been a Jesuit. He was born in Maryland, but he had done his education at the English college on the continent that was training when it wasn't possible for there to be Jesuit schools in England. But he had gone, and then he had entered the Society of Jesus. He had been ordained a priest, and then the society had been suppressed. And because of his ties to the people who were involved in the foundation of the United States, he was known to Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin, who was the ambassador to France of the early United States. I'm talking about 1780s here. We're talking about the very early days of the Republic of the United States. And Benjamin Franklin got talking to the papal nuncio in France about the fact that the Catholic Church wanted to appoint a bishop in the United States. There'd never been an actual bishop in the United States, a regular diocese, but they were used to talking to the heads of state about who to appoint to be bishops. This was this normal way that appointments for bishops had gone for hundreds and hundreds of years in the Catholic Church. But who were they supposed to talk to? The Congress, this new role of president, and none of the people in the United States seemed terribly interested in who the first Catholic bishop should be. But Benjamin Franklin caught wind of all this, and he told the papal nuncio in France, John Carroll should be the first bishop. And so he was appointed. And John Carroll, who was not a Jesuit at this point, because there were no Jesuits there where he was, and the society had been universally suppressed, he decided that he needed a Catholic college. He wanted a place where Catholics could study, free of the influence of Protestantism that was present in all the other schools that were being founded at that time. And who did he look to found his college but ex-Jesuits? So Georgetown was not actually founded by Jesuits, but it was founded in the way of a Jesuit college by a bunch of ex-Jesuits. And to make this story stranger, these ex-Jesuits rejoined the Society of Jesus, a lot of them, prior to the universal restoration of the society. How did they do that? Because the Society of Jesus still existed. And where did the Society of Jesus still exist? In Russia. And that's one of the main parts of the story that I want to talk about today. I want to talk about how the society continued to exist in Russia, how it was able to sort of rebuild itself from there, how people all over the world were able to rejoin the society in Russia and to join, not just to rejoin, but to join for the first time when the society was not universally restored. And then we'll get toward the actual restoration itself. There's a lot of humor and a lot of oddity in how the society was preserved during this time. And it's a complicated story to tell, but it's a story that involves a lot of desolation. And so the rule that I want to look at this lecture is, during a time, the fifth rule of the first week, during a time of desolation, one should never make a change. Instead, one should remain firm and constant in the resolutions and in the decision which one had on the day before the desolation, or in a decision which one was during a previous time of consolation. For just as the good spirit is chiefly the one who guides and counsels us in time of consolation, so it is the evil spirit who does this in time of desolation. By following his counsels, we can never find the way to a right decision. The question is, how did the society handle its desolations at this time? There is great temptation in desolation to throw everything out. What we're going to see is that there were a number of Jesuits who stayed true to their fundamental resolutions during the time of the suppression. And that's the lesson in discernment for us. What were the fundamental resolutions they remained faithful to? Their commitment to the Catholic Church, many of them as priests, because just because the Society of Jesus didn't exist, didn't mean they weren't priests anymore. And they also stayed true to their fundamental resolution as Jesuits. Now, I don't mean in all cases that they were able to remain to be Jesuits, but they were able to remain true to the ideals of what they had promised, to the ideals of they had learned in terms of prayer, in terms of commitment to the church, in terms of availability, and in terms of care for their former brothers. They did not allow the awfulness of what had happened to distract them from the fundamental call that they had as Catholics, as Christians, and as people dedicated to following in the way of proceeding of the Society of Jesus, even in this case when the Society of Jesus did not exist. And that's an important lesson for us, because when we are in periods of intense opposition and desolation, it's very tempting to throw it all out, to assume that that we need to make a dramatic change. But that is not, that is so often the voice of the evil spirit, not the voice of God. So let's look at that in today's conversation. Basic timeline of the time of the suppression that I just want to go over, because I think it makes things a little clearer. So the universal suppression is in 1773, Pope Clement XIV, Dominus ac Redemptor. It's in 1777 that a novitiate opens in Polotsk, in what's now Belarus, in Russia at the time. And in 1782, there's a Jesuit general congregation, not a universal general congregation, but of the society that somehow still existed. And in 1801, Pope Pius VII confirmed in writing the existence of the Society of Jesus in Russia. He said, this is in fact the Jesuits. It was the first written confirmation from a pope that the society still existed. In 1804, the society was restored in Naples and in Sicily by the Pope. So it still exists in Russia, and now it exists in Naples and Sicily. And then in 1814 is the universal restoration of the society with the bull Solicitudo Omnium. So it's a strange story. Let's see if we can unpack it. Let's see if we can unpack what we can learn about discernment from it. But to do that, I think it behooves us to go back for a moment to the story of Joseph Pignatelli, Jose Pignatelli, who had been one of the Jesuits who was expelled from Spain at the time of the expulsion. And just to talk a little bit about what the affective experience of the suppression was like, or in this case, starting with the expulsions. He was very well connected through his family in Spain, and his family was desperately trying to get him out of this awful situation. And it was, in fact, at sea, in these ships packed to the gills with Jesuits in very bad condition, who were being transported from Spain to Italy after the expulsions to the Papal States. Basically, Spain was saying, well, you're Catholics, and the Pope should have to deal with your papal order and trying to get rid of them. And they were greeted by guns at the Papal States. The Papal States did not think that they could take in all these thousands of Jesuits. And so it was very hard for the Jesuits to find a safe harbor at this time. And amid all of this, Pignatelli actually got a letter from his brother basically saying, hey, we can take care of you. We can get you out of there. We can get you a nice benefice. You can be a priest. Just get out of there. Forget this, abandon the society. And it was in response to his brother that Joseph Pignatelli wrote the following words, which are part of the letter that is in the Jesuit Office of Readings for his feast day on November 14th. It he said to his brother, "It is now 14 years since I embraced the religious state in the Society of Jesus. In making this step, I had the goodwill of our then sovereign, Ferdinand IV. My original desire was to be sent to the missions among the Indians, but to that my superiors dissented for fear of giving offense to my family. I have no intention of abandoning my present state. On the contrary, it is my firm determination to live and die a Jesuit." Pignatelli remained true to the convictions, to the discernments that he had done in consolation, even in moments of intense desolation. The journey of Pignatelli and his comrades is a harrowing one. They arrive in Corsica, where they get some support from the Franciscan friars there. Pignatelli is the one who kind of gets the provisions the Jesuit needs. They then go to Sardinia. They then go to Genoa. They then have to cross from Genoa all the way across Italy to Ferrara. And it's finally in Ferrara that the Jesuits, exiles from Spain, find something of a home with the Jesuits there. And they're living there. There's not necessarily a lot to do because there's way too many Jesuits around, but they find a welcome. And in fact, in 1771, a few years later, Pignatelli actually takes his final vows as a Jesuit at the Jesuit Church in Ferrara on February 2nd, the Feast of the Presentation. He takes his vows 2 years before the universal suppression of the society. And there's a story that Pignatelli is in the of Pignatelli at the time of the universal suppression, that they gather together all the Jesuits in the church of the Gesù in Ferrara and read them the brief of suppression. And Pignatelli is noted to have said the following words at the end of the reading of the brief. He says, "Why should ours," he said this in front of everyone, got up and said this, "why should ours be the hearts to bleed in this affliction? Why should ours be the eyes to weep in sorrow? We know that we have committed no fault in all this unhappy business. Those who caused our suppression or contributed to it, it is they who have reason to be downcast, not we. Grief is more befitting to them than to ourselves. Tell me, whither shall they go to find men as sacrificing as our fathers here? How are they going to obtain priests as willing as they to teach in their schools, as ready to wear themselves out in the best years of their lives, and that without recompense for the sake of their children? That time will come when they will cry out for these fathers to return to them, but their cry will be in vain. They shall not find them." Staying true to his convictions. And in fact, of course, he was quite right. And in fact, it was particularly for the education of children that the society was restored, as in a different lecture talk about in regard to the restoration of the society. So the Society of Jesus doesn't exist anymore, except that it does. And I want to tell this part of the story in regard to discernment and obedience. This is an important thing that we need to kind of look at for a minute, because it can appear, and it has appeared to many, particularly lay scholars, that the Jesuits were disobedient in continuing to exist in Russia after the universal suppression of the society. I would argue that they were not. I would argue that it was just as obedient for the Jesuits who remained Jesuits in Russia as it was for the Jesuits who accepted suppression elsewhere. Because, and I hope this is clear to you, because it's an important thing about who we are as Jesuits, Jesuit obedience is not a simple thing. It is not as simple as you just simply do what you're told and you don't think about it. We have to engage with it. We have to engage, and we have to see if we can understand the mind of the one giving us the orders. And we need to work with what is real, not what is ideal in our minds, in order to exercise our obedience well and to serve God and the church in that way. And so keep that all in mind as we go through this story. So the key thing here is the way that the society was suppressed by Clement XIV is by a papal brief. Now, that's not the highest kind of papal document that could have been issued. A papal bull, if he had issued it as a papal bull, it would have been immediately enforceable as soon as he promulgated the bull, as soon as he read the bull, the Pope himself. A brief, on the other hand, required the monarchs, the Catholic monarchs and other monarchs, to give it to nuncios and bishops and others, and it needed to be read out in all these different localities, like you've heard, it was read out in the church in the Jesuit in Ferrara. So it needed to be read out to be enforced. So there were a few places where this didn't happen. Notably, it didn't happen in Prussia and in Russia. Now, the thing about Prussia and Russia is that neither of them had Catholic monarchs, and the monarchs there, the Russian Orthodox monarch, Catherine the Great, and Frederick II of Prussia, Lutheran, didn't want the brief to be promulgated because they didn't want the society to be suppressed. Why didn't they want the society to be suppressed? Because of their deep Catholic devotion? Of course not. Because the Jesuits were running schools, and they wanted the Jesuits to keep running schools. And of course, they had no respect for the papal authority. So what did they care that the Pope wanted these people suppressed? They wanted them to keep on running schools. So both of these monarchs decide not to enforce the bull. The bull is also not promulgated in Canada. It's not promulgated in various little pockets. Now, what happens in Canada is the Jesuits sort of continue on a little bit, but eventually die out. What happens in Prussia is eventually Frederick does decide to enforce the bull. What happens in Russia is the story that's really worth telling here. So in Russia, there are 4 Jesuit colleges, 2 residences, 3 missionary houses, and 9 missionary statements. And in 1773, this accounts for 201 Jesuits, 97 of whom are priests. I'm not sure of the division between brothers and scholastics, but there's obviously a fair number of people in formation in Russia at this time. Russia, we're talking about the Russian Empire. We're talking largely about Poland, Belarus, which are the Catholic parts. So at the time of when the brief is not promulgated in Russia, because Catherine tells the Catholic bishops that they can't promulgate it, the rector of the College at Polotsk is Stanislaus Chernovitz. And because the College of Polotsk is just kind of has the prominence, and so he kind of becomes de facto the head of the Jesuits. And so he's the one who has to deal with the fact that something very strange has happened. The society is universally suppressed, but they're not suppressed. And he recognizes that this is a contradiction. So he writes to the papal nuncio in Russia to ask for clarification. What are we supposed to do? And he points out, he says, well, we can't not recognize it, but we also recognize, if we do recognize it, the brief, we're going to anger Catherine, we're going to harm Catholics. What are we supposed to do? Because, the society doesn't exist, so how can we exist? And the papal nuncio writes back to him in very strange terms. He says that the brief, of course, is binding. It's binding, okay? So you can't get around that. But a person or persons cannot be bound to do that which is impossible. The brief is binding, but you can't be bound to do that which is impossible. Huh? He seems to be saying that, well, no, of course you should be suppressed, but maybe there's circumstances in which you can't be. And he says, really what you need to do is you need to go to Catherine and you need to ask her to suppress you. So he seems to be acknowledging in very subtle Vaticanese, as we would call it today, that this irregularity might need to endure. So Chernovitz follows this man's instruction. He goes to Catherine and he says, can you suppress us? And she says, no. And he says, well, could you at least not, if you're not going to suppress us, could you not call us the Society of Jesus? We'll continue to work for you, but we won't be Jesuits anymore. And she says, in case you're wondering how Catherine the Great was as a spiritual director, that's a joke. she says to him, "You're being too scrupulous. Just continue on. We're not changing anything." So he did what the papal nuncios told him to do. And it seems that if that's the only way that they can be suppressed, it seems like being suppressed is impossible. This does not satisfy Czernowitz. Time's passing and things are going on. Years pass, but finally, in fact, he's so frustrated with the oddity of the canonical situation that he writes to the Pope in 1776, 3 years later. And Pope Pius VI writes back to him in these, now we've got a new Pope already, not the same Pope who had suppressed them, writes back to him in these words: "May the result of your prayers, as I foresee and you desire, be a happy one. May the result of your prayers, as I foresee and you desire, be a happy one." Well, that's clear. In a way, it is clear, because what the Pope has said is, I'm not going to say that the Society of Jesus doesn't exist, but I'm not going to say that it does. I'm not going to say that it does exist, but I'm not going to say that it doesn't exist either. And I foresee that what you want is going to happen. Meaning, I foresee that the Society of Jesus is going to be able to continue. So the obedience of the Jesuits is always trying to see the mind of our superiors and the mind of the Pope and understand what the real desires are. And it seems clear that for some reason, the nuncio first, now the Pope, doesn't want the society to go away completely. And so they continue on. It's an act of obedience, a complicated obedience, but a real obedience, because we live in the real world, not in the ideal world. But it occurs to Czernowitz and the other Jesuits that if they're going to continue in this weird fashion, they need more Jesuits. They need a novitiate. So enter Stanislaus Sistrevovich, I'm sure I'm butchering that name, forgive me, who is the bishop of the Belarusian Catholic Diocese, and of course effectively works for Catherine, because even though he's Catholic bishop, she oversees all these things, and the Catholic Church, as is obvious by the fact that she's so important in the survival of the society in Russia. And he's heard that the Jesuits think they need a novitiate so they can train up new Jesuits. Catherine wants this, and so he thinks of a scheme in order to ensure that this can happen, because the Society of Jesus doesn't exist, so how could it open a novitiate? So what he does is he goes to Rome, he writes to Rome, and he says maybe they could give him authority over all Catholic religious orders in White Russia, in Catholic Russia. And it seems like he leads people in the Curia who are anti-Jesuit and papal Curia who are anti-Jesuit to believe that he wants this so that he can finally once and for all suppress the Society of Jesus. So the enemies of the Jesuits are like, oh, we can get rid of the Society of Jesus. So they like this idea. So they encourage the Pope to accept this. Great. Czernowitz, the bishop, whose name I'm not going to say again because I'm going to mispronounce it, gets the authority over all religious orders, gets papal authority over religious orders in White Russia. They think he's going to suppress the Society of Jesus. And so what does he do? He gives them permission to open a novitiate. So the novitiate's approved in February 1777, and it opens up Paulus in 1780. And then things snowball. In 1782, they decide to have a general congregation and appoint a vicar general, not a superior general, because there's no superior because the Jesuits don't exist, but this is the person who's acting in this place of the superior general. And at that congregation, they approve a process for how Jesuits can re-enter the Society of Jesus, because there's suddenly times passing and Jesuits and other places are saying, wait, this society still exists in Russia. Can I get in on that? Can I rejoin the society through Russia? And so they say, yeah, come to Russia, do a 30-day retreat, renew your vows, and you re-enter. And they decide they're going to accept new novices this way from anywhere, including as far away for example, as the Netherlands, where a young man named Jan Rutan hears about the revival of the Society of Jesus with great joy. He knows a lot of ex-Jesuits, and he wants to be a Jesuit, so he travels all the way across Europe and enters the Society of Jesus in Polotsk, which is an important part of the story because he's going to be the most important general of the restored society. And he entered during the suppression. 1783, Pius VI actually gives verbal approval to the existence of the Jesuits, their novitiate, and their vicar general. And again, things continue to grow in this way. They have a whole series, 5 congregations, where they continue to elect vicar generals. And in fact, the last of these vicar generals to be elected is 1805, where Tadeusz Brozowski, who actually is the vicar general of the society until 1814, and he becomes the superior general of the society at the time of the Restoration. They don't have an election at the time of the Restoration. They just accept that the vicar general in Russia is the superior general, and so he becomes the superior general at the moment of the restoration of the society. Meanwhile, as all this is going on, Jose Pignatelli has been in Italy working as a priest, doing his best to stay faithful to those commitments, trying to keep in touch with former Jesuits and take care of former Jesuits. Really known as a confessor in Parma, preaching, doing all these sorts of things. But eventually he joins the province of Parma, 1788 and 1788. What's the province of Parma? Well, the province of Parma is they actually start founding provinces that are dependent upon the society in Russia. So in other words, in 1788, Pignatelli is able to rejoin the Society of Jesus through these means. And in fact, in 1799, he becomes the founding novice director of the new novitiate in Parma. In 1803, Pignatelli becomes the provincial of Italy, and so forth and so on. He's going to die in 1811, so before the universal restoration of the society in 1814. But by that time, he's in Rome. He's the provincial superior of all the Jesuits in Italy. And the society is sort of back, even though it's not entirely back. But what we see in Pignatelli is this enduring faithfulness, He, through suppression, whereas we see in some of the Jesuits in Russia, a faithfulness to the church that is also deeply complex. But what are they all doing? What they're all doing is remaining faithful both to the church and to their commitments as Jesuits in the way that is possible, in the real, not in the ideal. And they are not giving in to the desolation that they undoubtedly felt at the suppression of the Society of Jesus. They are staying true to who they were as Christians, as Catholics, as priests, as faithful servants of the church, and as brothers to their former Jesuits, in the case of Pignatelli, who did a lot of work to try to take care of his fellow Jesuits. And so it's a good lesson for us in how to remain faithful in troubled times and for the complexities of what discernment and obedience can look like. Thank you.